As I stood alone at my wife's funeral, my father's words echoed. Blame your wife for losing us that deal. So, I made him regret it. Hello, my name is Michael Anthony Johnson. I am 32 years old and the Chief Operating Officer at Carter Dynamics, a company that specializes in supply chain management and transportation logistics. My family, like Carter Dynamics, formerly ran a business in the same field. I used to believe that I would spend my entire life working in the family business, that it would be the foundation for my future. However, life does not always go as planned, and the most devastating blows can come from those we trust. Even though a year has passed, the agony of losing my wife remains within me, like a wound that never really heals. But the betrayal by my own family has made it much more difficult to move on. They chose to turn their backs on me when I needed a hand the most. Not just turn away, but force me out of their lives in the most horrible way conceivable. If there's one thing that bothers me more than the day I lost the woman I loved, it's how my family took advantage of my weakness and stabbed me in the back without hesitation. And that's when I knew I had no choice but to learn to walk alone. It all began over a year ago. After 4 months of battling late-stage ovarian cancer, my wife Ella died while still clutching my hand. We met 3 years ago at an industry meeting in San Diego. Ella was an event organizer at the time, and I had recently taken over management of a tiny business within my family's firm. We met, laughed, and quickly realized we had found something wonderful in one another. Following 2 years of dating, we decided to marry. We expected life to proceed quietly as it does for so many other couples, falling in love, marrying, and welcoming beautiful small children into a household full of laughter. However, life is seldom so straightforward. We discovered Ella's sickness one morning in March. She suddenly collapsed in the kitchen while preparing breakfast. When I hurried her to the hospital, I assumed she had simply been overworking herself. But then the doctor came out, his face filled with sadness, and told us the news: late-stage ovarian cancer. It was a cold, clinical sentence containing a harsh truth. She had approximately 4 months left. Hearing those words, I felt like my entire world had broken. It felt as if the ground had crushed beneath my feet. All of our hopes and dreams had been reduced to ashes. After hearing the doctor's words, I attempted to conceal the reality. I told myself I had to stay strong and keep smiling as if nothing had happened. But Ella knew. She only had to look into my eyes to grasp everything without explanation. In the days that followed, I spent almost all of my free time with her. I reduced my workload, declined meetings, and set away anything unneeded. We went for more walks, prepared more dinners together, and talked late into the night, as if we were trying to grasp every precious minute that was slipping gently through our fingers. Sometimes I wished it was all just a bad dream, a nightmare from which I would awaken to find Ella back in the kitchen, laughing and playing one of her foolish little jokes on me. I did everything from modifying her treatment plans to putting her into the best medical institutes I could locate, hoping for a miracle. However, she died 4 months later, as predicted by the doctors. It was a calm afternoon. The sun shone through the hospital window, draping across her face like a lovely, soothing blanket. Ella gripped my hand tightly and muttered through weak breaths, "Promise me you'll live well, and someday you'll find happiness again." Despite my heart's desire to cling on to her, I nodded and forced a smile, knowing it was the only way to let her go peacefully. 3 days later, we held Ella's funeral. Almost everyone who knew me and Ella showed up that day, including her parents, close friends, former colleagues, and neighbors. They all put their lives on hold and went considerable distances to bid their final farewells. Only my family was missing. My father, Richard Edward Johnson, and my brother, Ethan James Johnson, never arrived. My mother, Laura Michelle Johnson, stopped by for approximately 10 minutes. She stood beside the casket, laid a wreath, and then silently looked for me among the crowd. When I asked her, "Where are Dad and Ethan?" she shook her head and muttered so gently that I had to lean in to hear. "The company's busy. They couldn't make it." I stood there squeezing my hands to contain my rage. That excuse, if it can be called that, felt worse than silence because I knew they hadn't paid Ella a single visit in the 4 months she had been fighting. Not even a message. In her final days, she received no words of support. That was the first time in my life I realized that just because they share the same blood doesn't mean they'll be there for you when you need them the most. I returned to work several days after Ella's burial. When I went into the office, my team members paused what they were doing. They approached me one by one, each offering a nod, a solid handshake, or a quick touch on the shoulder. No fancy words, no awkward small conversation, just genuine expressions of sympathy that spoke more than words could. The internal phone rang at 10 a.m., and I was buried in a mountain of backlogged emails, pushing myself to focus, escaping the weight of reality. My father's icy, lifeless voice came through. "Come up to my office." Without saying anything, I placed down my pen and stood up. When I entered the conference room, my father was already seated at the head of the table. Ethan slouched casually in the chair beside him. Nobody offered me a seat. No one looked at me with sympathy. Before I could say anything, my father spoke. "You're fired. Your shares will be reclaimed." I didn't move. He hadn't called to share my pain or provide assistance. He called me up and told me I was fired. It took me a few seconds to find my voice. When I finally spoke, my throat tightened. "Why?" He spoke quickly, his voice flat and icy as a conviction. "Because you took a week off. The business lost a $200,000 deal." Hearing that, I felt my entire body numb, but managed to remain calm. I responded slowly, each syllable measured. "You approved my leave. You said Ethan would cover things while I was gone." Ethan cut in, his voice oozing with arrogance, as if waiting for the right moment to twist the knife. "Don't blame me, Michael. Everyone has to accept responsibility for their own mistakes." Before I could respond, my father turned from Ethan and locked eyes with me. His tone was severe enough to cut. "Exactly. Don't blame Ethan. If you want to blame someone, blame your wife." I stood there, my pulse hammering so hard that it blocked out everything else. I could not believe it. After everything I had given them, everything I had sacrificed, they swept it all away without hesitation. But it did not end there. My father kept speaking, each syllable stinging deeper than the last. "Your wife's death cost the company that contract. Your wife's death is the reason you got fired. If your wife hadn't died, you wouldn't have taken time off, and the company would have made a huge profit." The air in the room was so heavy that it felt like it could crush any sound before it formed. I glanced at him, the man who had once been the epitome of everything I believed in my childhood, and realized I had never fully known him. My heart was broken, not because of Ella's death. It wasn't the anguish that made me want to fall and cry. It was at this point that I realized my misery was nothing more than an inconvenience in the way of my family's money. I became enraged. I ground out each word, my voice shaking from the effort it required to keep myself together. "What the hell are you saying?" I took a step closer, placing my hands firmly on the cold surface of the table and locking eyes with him. "My wife died, and you didn't say a damn word. Not once did you check on her. Not once did you visit. And now you stand here, dragging her name through the dirt to cover up your failures. Yours and Ethan's." My father slammed his hand down on the table before I could finish speaking. The harsh, forceful sound echoed across the small chamber, causing Ethan to flinch. He yelled, his voice harsh and angry, "Enough! Get the hell out." Without hesitation, I reached up and ripped off my employee badge, the same one I had proudly worn on my first day as an executive, which he had personally given me. I took it off and hurled it on the table in front of him, landing with a frigid, final thud. Without looking back, I walked out of that room, out of the place I had once imagined would always be a part of my life. And I realized then that I had lost this family for good. After leaving my father's office, I discreetly returned to mine. My steps seemed heavy, but I didn't hesitate. I opened my locker and began packing my belongings. One notebook, one pen, and a small framed portrait of Ella and me from our new project. Each item was neatly packed in a plain cardboard box. When a couple of my team members observed me packing, they looked up, surprised and concerned. One of them spoke up, his tone uncertain. "Boss Michael, what's going on?" I simply smiled and nodded my head. I realized there was no use in trying to explain. Suddenly, Lincoln, an employee who had worked closely with me for 2 years, cried out from across the room, his voice filled with rage. "There's a termination email about Michael. They're saying he lost a big contract because he took a week off." The room fell silent. Then another voice came through, filled with wrath. "But his wife just died. That's ridiculous." Whispers swiftly swept throughout the room, and I watched as expressions changed from astonishment to rage. A few minutes later, Lincoln walked forward, his voice steady and booming. "If Michael's leaving, I'm leaving, too. I know exactly what Ethan's capable of. He's nothing but a useless hack. Before anyone could react, Nolan, the project team leader, added firmly, I'm out, too. And right after that, Brian, the head of strategic partnerships, calmly set his pen down and said, clear as day. Count me in. Each sentence felt like another crack shattering the fake image that this company worked so hard to maintain. Standing there, I could only freeze for a moment, my heart bleeding. Not because I had just lost a profession into which I had poured my all, but because of these people I had taught, battled alongside, and who chose to stand with me even when I had no power to offer them. I gulped hard, grasping the package in my hands. And honestly, I had no idea what to say. For the first time that day, all I had was one brutal sentence ringing in my ears. Your wife's death is the reason you got fired. I could have forgiven them if the grief they inflicted had been directed only at me. I had previously forcefully told myself to look the other way, that blood bonds could never completely be broken. But if they tried to offend Ella, the woman I loved the most, the woman who departed this world in anguish and loneliness, even if she was no longer alive, I would never let them taint her memory again. At that point, I made a pledge to myself. I would show them that the betrayal, coldness, and cruelty they had sown would all come back to haunt them. I would not yell. I would not seek vengeance with uncontrolled rage. I'd repay everything they owed me with achievement, power, and unwavering determination. And when that day arrived, I would stand before them with no pity in my eyes. Not because I had grown callous, but because they chose this ending after using my wife's death to justify their shortcomings. The next day, after a long night of thought, I took a week off to travel. I needed time alone, a period of silence to begin healing from Ella's death and to calm the fresh wounds caused by my own family. For the entire week, I was utterly disconnected. No emails, calls, or texts. Just me, a few strange cities, and boundless roads where my melancholy could fade into the breeze. The week flew by. As I returned to my old residence that afternoon, a similar blank sadness came over me. I tossed my suitcase into the corner, sunk into the sofa, and grabbed my phone. When I turned it on, the screen filled up with missed calls, unread messages, and email notifications. The pulsing blue light felt almost taunting, as if the world had spun forward while I remained motionless. I scrolled through the emails. The majority were trash adverts or belated letters from old colleagues. But then my finger came to a name I recognized all too well, Matthew Carter. Matthew, a former friend and longtime rival of my family's business. Without hesitation, I opened the email. Inside, there was only one line. Call me as soon as you see this. There were no explanations or light conversation. Without hesitation, I phoned his number. The phone only rang twice before he answered. Matthew's voice filtered through, urgent but measured. Michael, are you free tonight? I want to take you to dinner. There's something important we need to discuss. I stopped for a while before responding without hesitation. Sure, just send me the address. After hanging up, I sat there for a long time, a peculiar sense of anticipation rising within me. I had a sensation that something was about to shift, and I knew I needed to be prepared. That evening, I arrived at the restaurant Matthew had given me the address for. Matthew had arrived 5 minutes earlier. When he saw me coming in, he rose up and shook my hand, his eyes reflecting a genuine sincerity. We didn't get right into business. After a few brief words of encouragement, we ate dinner and talked about minor matters. When dessert was eventually served, I put my knife and fork down, looked up at him, and got right to the point. So, what's this dinner really about? Matthew leaned back in his chair, his countenance becoming serious. I heard you got fired, I said with a faint smirk, my voice tinted with cynicism. News travels fast, huh? Matthew continued, his tone calm and methodical, as if he had carefully chosen his words. Because you're talented, Michael. I'm willing to bet you've gotten no less than 10 offers from rival companies this past week. I only smiled, neither confirming nor denying, but Matthew's expression told me he knew. A few seconds later, Matthew leaned forward, his voice low but forceful, as if he had practiced it. Come work for me. I'll make you Chief Operating Officer. And here's the deal, you can bring your team with you. I'm not joking, Michael. If you don't come with me, I'll ensure no other competitor touches you. As soon as he finished, Matthew burst out laughing, a crisp, confident chuckle that rang around the diner. Even through the laughs, I could tell he was dead serious. I sat there for a bit, sipping my water and considering the offer. Matthew quickly added, his voice softening, "You don't have to decide tonight. Think it over. Give me your answer in 3 days." Right then, I laid my glass down, locked eyes with him, and stated without hesitation, "No need for 3 days. Draw up the contract. I'll be at your office first thing in the morning. As long as you keep your word, my team will accompany me." Matthew's eyes lit up briefly, as if he had just won a big triumph. 20 minutes later, we exited the restaurant together. Standing under the silent night sky, I took a deep breath and felt a genuine spark of hope for the first time in weeks. This time, I realized I was starting over. Not for my family, but for myself. The next morning, I arrived at Carter Dynamics at exactly 8 a.m. The brand new office building stood out in the middle of downtown, not flashy, but polished, professional, and remarkable in all aspects. As soon as I reached the lobby, I noticed Matthew waiting for me. He stepped over and gave me a solid handshake, his eyes filled with genuine trust. "Welcome home, Michael." After that, we went straight to the elevators. Matthew said very little on the trip up. Perhaps he realized that I didn't need hollow words right now. I required action. When we got to the executive floor, he led me into a small private meeting room that had already been set up for us. A hefty contract was sitting on the table with a slick fountain pen carefully put beside it. Matthew smiled slightly, his voice calm and confident. "I kept my word. You'll be our chief operating officer. Salary, benefits, and the clause allowing you to bring your team are all in there." Without hesitation, I grabbed the pen and began skimming the words. Every line on the paper felt like evidence that I wasn't just a pawn in someone else's game this time. It took me less than 10 minutes to sign everything. When I put down the pen for the last time, Matthew stretched out and grabbed my shoulder firmly. "I know you're not going to let me down." He walked out of the room, leaving me alone with the freshly signed forms. I sat for another minute, taking in a deep breath. At that moment, a peculiar sensation flooded over me. Not exactly excitement, not quite relief, but a quiet, unwavering determination. The word that Michael Anthony Johnson had joined Carter Dynamics circulated rapidly throughout the logistics and transportation industries. By that morning, my phone had been ringing nonstop. Message after message, call after call, email after email, all from former coworkers, folks who had formerly worked with me at the family business. As I browsed through my email, familiar names appeared: the chief engineer, the head of operations, and the warehouse supervisor. And each message contained the same simple phrase: "If there's a spot for me, I want to come with you." Without hesitation, I began writing a list. In my heart, there was no room for two-faced folks or those who just knew how to follow the changing winds. I chose only those who had supported and believed in me when I had nothing else, those who valued loyalty over simple possibilities. That afternoon, Matthew and I had an emergency meeting. When I delivered him the list, he chuckled with satisfaction. "You've pulled together all the heavy hitters from back in the day. You're bringing a championship team over here, Michael." I responded with a quick smile. There was no need for huge words. There was no need for boasting. We both felt this squad would lay the groundwork for something big. The internal interviews the following day were brief and to the point. There were no screening rounds or difficult examinations, just one simple question I asked each of them: "Do you still trust me enough to fight by my side again?" And no one hesitated. Every handshake was solid, and every look was full of confidence. We, those who had formerly been rejected, doubted, and underestimated, would reconstruct everything from the rubble that others had left behind. The days that followed went by so swiftly I could barely feel the time passing. With word of my transfer to Carter Dynamics spreading and my reputation established over the years, I scarcely had to raise a finger to acquire business. Everything changed when clients learned I was no longer with the family business. It became evident that the ties I had spent years establishing were not solely due to the Johnson name, but also because of myself. No cold calls or sales emails were needed. Major clients, the same partners who had put their trust in me on countless projects, began to withdraw from my previous company. Contracts were canceled, cooperation proposals were withdrawn, and meetings were rescheduled indefinitely. All of this occurred in less than a month after I departed. I didn't feel smug. I did not celebrate it, but I wasn't sorry either. When my family chose betrayal, They severed the bonds that had once represented the most exceptional value I had ever offered them. Now they were reaping what they had sown. And as I had predicted, my phone rang 2 months later on a late evening as I was finishing up my papers before heading home. When I looked at the screen, the name that displayed made me pause for a second: Richard Edward Johnson. I spread a faint, frigid smile on my lips. I knew the call would come sooner or later. I responded calmly, my voice steady. "What do you want, Dad?" I talked first. His voice came through right away, albeit slightly strained. "Michael, we need to talk." I remained silent and cool, waiting for him to get to the point. Richard spoke a few seconds later, as if reading from a script with a measured tone. "Would you consider coming back? The company's struggling. We need you." I said nothing. I just waited and let him fill the stillness. His voice lowered, a rare hint of urgency leaking through. "I'm willing to offer you 30% more than what Carter Dynamics is paying you. And your shares, they'll be reinstated." I closed my eyes briefly, allowing the nothingness to spread gently from within. Promises and belated offers aren't really sensible right now. I raised my sight to the city lights shimmering outside the window and murmured slowly, "Do you remember what you said to me that day?" The line fell silent right after I asked my question. No justifications, no sighs, just a heavy, unmistakable quiet. The quiet spoke louder than any words could. And in that moment, I knew for certain that everything between us had finished a long time ago. Today was the day we finally stated it aloud. Following yesterday night's call, I assumed they'd get the message and leave me alone. But I was mistaken. The next morning at 7 o'clock, the doorbell began to ring loudly and relentlessly. I was still in the kitchen making coffee when it started, the noise dragging on until I had to set down my mug and rush to the door. When I opened it, my mother was standing there. She appeared worn down and shattered, her face smeared with tears, her hands trembling as if desperately clutching to any glimmer of hope. When she saw me, she raced forward, her voice trembling and choked with tears. "Michael, please come back. The family needs you. I'm begging you." I tightened my grasp on the doorframe and kept my voice calm. There was no rage left inside me, only a chilly, heavy calm. A warning from a former coworker who had surreptitiously messaged me came to mind just then. "Be careful. They only want you back to salvage the firm. Once it is stable, they will toss you out again as they did previously." I didn't need any other proof. I took a deep breath, raised my head, and stared directly at my mother, the woman who had once held me in her arms but now stood before me like a desperate negotiator in a one-sided negotiation. My voice lowered, colder than it had ever been. "That's enough, Mom." She looked up at me, surprised, with tears flowing down her face. I stepped completely out onto the porch, my voice steady and unshaken. "I know everything. I know about the company collapsing. If I return, when things are fixed, you'll push me out again, just like last time." She opened her lips to deny it, but I interrupted her with a raised hand. "Save it. Last time, I lost everything because I believed in family. It's not happening again." Right then, I took out my phone and held it up between us, saying steadily, "I've already filed for a restraining order. Starting today, you, Dad, and Ethan are not allowed within a single step of me. If you keep harassing me, the police will get involved." She froze, her face losing color and her mouth moving silently as if to implore, but I'd already turned back inside. The sound of the door closing behind me rang throughout the home, signaling the end. I leaned against it and closed my eyes for a few seconds. No more agony. There is no longer anger, only freedom. Without me, the family business spiraled out of control. Within a few months, big contracts were canceled. Old partners abandoned the company. Key workers left, and Ethan and Richard slid deeper into the devastation they had built for themselves. I didn't care. I did not follow their decline step by step. Nonetheless, the news reached me through acquaintances, business colleagues, and cold, detached business stories. One evening, while I sat on the balcony nursing a glass of whiskey over melting ice, my phone rang. I wasn't surprised when the name Ethan James Johnson appeared on the screen. I paused for less than a second before picking up. Ethan's fury-filled voice erupted through the speaker as soon as the phone connected. "This is all your fault." The words struck my ear like a smack, but I remained motionless, my gaze as serene and steady as a quiet lake. After a single breath, I raised my glass, took a little drink, and responded, my voice as cold as steel. I built it up, and I can tear it down. On the other end of the telephone, Ethan paused, stunned. I hung up without hesitation, denying him the opportunity to say anything else. I leaned back in my chair, gazing up at the bright night sky. There is no sense of triumph or victory, only the inevitable conclusion. They had to pay for their greed and disloyalty. 2 weeks ago, on a late afternoon, the doorbell rang unexpectedly while I was reviewing some new operating plans. I grimaced immediately. I wasn't expecting anyone that day. Walking to the door and opening it, the sight that met me made me want to slam it shut straight away. Richard and Ethan stood there, pallid and disheveled, unlike the arrogant, self-assured men they once were. Their eyes avoided mine, but their clenched fists revealed their desperation, as if they were holding onto the last shreds of dignity they possessed. Slowly, I folded my arms across my chest and leaned comfortably against the door frame, my voice as icy as ice. "What do you want?" Richard cleared his throat quickly, his eyes flickering frantically as he searched for the appropriate words. "Michael, your brother and I, we need your help." I didn't respond. I just raised an eyebrow and waited. Ethan took an awkward half-step forward, his voice scratchy and unsteady. "We know this house. You repurchased it when you were working for the family company. Technically, it was with the help of the family. Dad and I hoped you could sell it and use the money to save the company." Hearing that, I let out a quick, harsh laugh that immediately froze the air between us. Before they could make any more weak justifications, I spoke quietly and sharply, each word like a sword. "If you don't want to deal with the police, I suggest you get off my property within 30 seconds. Ethan was frightened as soon as I said those words, lifting his hands and quivering. "Wait, Michael, just hear us out. If not selling, then maybe just a loan? Just a small one. We need $50,000 to start over." Richard soon responded, frantic. "That's right, Michael. Just 50 grand. It's nothing to you now. We're family, aren't we? Family helps each other in hard times." I clenched my fists, trying to contain the rage that was rising inside me. Ella's pale face on the hospital bed, her tiny hand clutching mine as she said farewell, came to mind at that moment. I stared at the two men standing in front of me, my voice lowering to a deadly stillness. "You want my help?" I took a step forward, getting near enough so they couldn't avoid my stare. "Fine," I said slowly, accentuating each syllable. "Go to the cemetery. Kneel at my wife's grave. Beg her for forgiveness for everything you did to her." I stopped for a beat before finishing, my voice crisp and final. "If she forgives you, then I will too." Richard and Ethan stood there, stunned into silence. Neither could speak a word. I quietly shut the door in their faces, hearing the sound of their frantic footsteps departing down the driveway. I leaned against the door, closing my eyes. Inside the silent house, there is no more wrath or anguish, simply the tranquility that comes from finally reclaiming your self-respect. If you're still here listening to my story after all this time, I have one thing to say to you. Thank you for remaining with me. I understand that this trip has not been easy to hear and even more difficult to accept, for often the hardest hurts come from those we once loved most. When I left my family and the company that I previously thought would be my life's work, I took a lot of guilt with me. Some evenings, I wondered whether I was wrong. Was I being too unkind by turning my back? But over time, I realized that enduring does not always entail loving. Sacrificing isn't always noble. Some families and relationships are simply hollow shells, rotten on the inside long before we are willing to accept it. And if you continue to cling to them solely for the sake of family or out of a sense of responsibility, you will eventually lose yourself. So if you find yourself in a similar situation today, in a toxic family, a rotting corporation, or a disrespectful relationship, allow yourself to choose a different choice. Decide to step into the light. Choose yourself. Choose your dignity. Do not look back. Don't lament something that was never truly worthy of you. And if somebody ever asked me, if you could do it all over again, would you make the same choice? I would say without hesitation, no, and walk away. And I would not look back. Before I complete the story, I'd like to ask you, those of you who are still here listening until the very end, what you would do if you were in my shoes. If you stood in front of a family that was eager to discard you the moment you collapsed, if you were betrayed at your most vulnerable, would you keep going, attempting to piece things back together? Or would you rather walk away, protect yourself, and never look back? Thanks for watching and diving into this wild family drama with me. If you love Reddit family drama, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next one.